Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Therapist in the Hot Seat podcast. This is our first episode, and it's safe to say that we're both bricking it at the moment. So hopefully this won't come out as too much of a car crash for you. But this is our very first episode, and we're going to do some introductions just to say hello. But just to give a bit of background, Tom, who's hosting with myself and I, are both cognitive behavioural therapists. And this is a podcast designed really to give a bit of insight into therapy and to break down some of the barriers around therapy, and also to kind of pick it apart and understand it and have a bit of a laugh at it sometimes too. So, Tom, I don't know how you feel about saying hello and introducing yourself.
Yeah, slightly nervous. I felt my pulse increase, but as we say to our clients, feel the fear, do it anyway. So here we are. So yeah, my name is Tom. I'm a CBT therapist. I've been in private practice for probably 4 or 5 years, and prior to that, I worked in the NHS with Tom. Yeah, and the reason we're doing this is because we wanted to talk through some, I suppose, blocks and barriers that clients can often feel to coming to therapy, what it looks like, make ourselves a bit more known as well. And we thought a podcast was the perfect way of doing that. Um, yeah, I suppose that's my introduction. And yourself? Is there
It's
anything
great to
else?
meet you, Tom. Great to meet you. My name is also Tom, and I am a cognitive behavioural therapist. And again, I worked with Tom in the NHS for a number of years, and worked in the NHS in total for around 12 years before working as a lecturer at the University of Reading, as a lecturer of clinical psychology, and then eventually being brave enough to go into full-time private practice, which Tom did a number of years before me, and I was very envious of. But yeah, so I'd always had my private practice running alongside my other jobs, and it was always very, very busy. And then decided to take the plunge. So here we are, adding to our busyness, really, and giving ourselves some more jobs to do on top of what we're already doing, Tom.
The one thing we need is more admin, so it makes a lot of sense for doing this.
Exactly, a bit more admin for us. Fantastic. So we also, what I didn't say at the start is that we want this podcast to follow the general structure of a CBT session. So that might also give some people a bit of an insight into how CBT works, if you were wondering. So you'll notice we go through some different categories as we go. And the first one is going to be our agenda setting. So, Tom, is there anything that you want to add to our agenda for this episode today?
Well, just to sort of introduce the, I suppose if it's okay, the function of the agenda is when we come to therapy and you do a session, obviously you have usually 50 to 60 minute window, and it's so easy and tempting to just, I think, fill that with every little thing that's going on, and that's absolutely fine. But one core component of CBT is it's quite a progressive modality, and therefore it probably benefits most from structure and consideration over how you use your time. So an agenda is a really good way of just making sure that you have a plan, you do something very useful, and you stick to it. And each session kind of, as much as possible, builds on the one before it. So I think we're going to just emulate that with these, just sort of normalize it as well. So anyway, to answer your question, yes, we've got some nice questions that we can band around, Tom. Some myths regarding CBT that we've mentioned earlier would be really, really good. And I think defining CBT, which is a trickier thing than I sort of originally imagined. I was scribbling some notes down before this recording, and I've sort of written half an essay of what is CBT. So it'd be really good to chuck around some ideas regarding that.
You're so right. And really, what is CBT these days? I mean, it's changed so much, hasn't it, as
Yeah.
well? So the idea is one of those questions, like you say, that always daunts me whenever a client says, what is CBT? And I think, my gosh, I'm not sure I know. So good. So good agenda
Yeah.
setting. So we'll start maybe, I thought we could start with a few ground rules just so that we're
Yeah.
aware of what we're doing here and how we're going to do it. And then maybe we could go into that main topic, maybe start with defining CBT and understanding a bit of what that is and our understanding of it, and see if we know what we're on about.
Yeah.
And then maybe we could have a bit of fun and look at some of the myths around CBT and
Yeah.
maybe start to explore some of those and see what our own personal views are on those.
Yeah.
And I think for our first episode, let's keep it light and fluffy. We don't want to go too deep too soon, right? And there's so many things we could do, but I think we're going to have different episodes with different topics. So let's, from there, we'll probably do a bit of a checkout and set any homework for each other, which we can maybe look at in future episodes as well.
Sounds good.
How does that sound?
Sounds good to me. So ground rules then, what are we thinking, generally speaking?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing is what do we want this to be? And I suppose I've already touched on that, is that I really want this podcast to be somewhere where people can come and learn about CBT and learn about therapy, but also about the processes of being a therapist.
Yeah.
And that doesn't exclude anybody. I want this to be a place for, I don't know, third wave
Mm.
therapists, integrative counselors, hypnotherapists, anybody who wants to come really and listen about different topics and hear our opinions on things, and who may generally have a bit of an interest in CBT as well, because,
Yeah.
there's so much to learn and it can feel quite daunting. And I know there's so many counselors and therapists that want to bring CBT into their work. So maybe this could be a light way of learning about it.
Yeah, and also one of my toxic traits as a therapist is self-disclosure, projecting. And one of the things I was quite excited to do with this podcast is to, when we've sort of got a bit of rhythm, a bit of pace together with it, maybe bring in some things that like have happened to us, either personally or socially or something like that. And use sort of like a running example of that, like how anxiety showed up for us in that moment, and what we could have done with CBT and so forth. So just to give it a bit of like color, I think would be really useful, and sort of free therapy as well for each other, something along those lines. Obviously, it goes without saying, but we would never break anyone's confidentiality. So if we do refer to friends or whomever, it goes without saying their names will be false, etc. If at all mentioned. So yes, some real life examples I think would be really good to bring it to life a little bit.
Absolutely. And being as unhinged as I am, I can bring quite a few of those in.
Well, we've only got 50 minutes.
I've only got 50 minutes. Oh, okay. Okay. But generally, I think that's what attracts people to therapists. That humanity and that willingness to say, yeah, you know what, I did that too, and
Yeah,
and this is
yeah,
how I dealt with it, and whether that
yeah,
was the right way or the wrong way.
yeah.
I mean, the other thing is I'll try not to talk over you, Tom, as best I can. I'll try not to breathe too heavily into the microphone, and I'll try not to slurp my tea. So maybe another ground rule is no eating anything crispy while we're recording as well. How
Fair
about that?
enough. Yep, I've got soup. That might be a bit extreme as well, though.
Okay.
So crispy or liquidy.
Soup. Gosh, it was well prepared. And the other thing I was going to say or the question is, what do we really not want this podcast to become? So I'll start off with that one. I really don't want it to become elitist, judgmental, purist, or anything like that. I want it to be flexible, fun, lighthearted, interesting, and intriguing, and for people who to want to go and look at things a bit more as a result. And that's why we're setting ourselves homework as well, to go and look at the things too.
That's a really good point. The homework, especially, we could almost design it so that we are always broadening our horizons a little bit, because it goes back to what we were saying about what is CBT. Yes, it's got its core components, but the boundaries are a little bit fuzzy. So it would be wise, I guess, to always be sort of pushing at those. Yeah, one thing that I don't want it to be is I follow so many mental health pages on Instagram, and there always seems to be this like separation between all the different modalities, which I find really bizarre. Like it's snootiness, if that's a word, or I don't know, or just condescending or bitchiness almost about other modalities. And I always think you're all on the same, you're all fighting the same fire at the end of the day. So always sort of open and supportive of other modalities and not really looking down our noses. Not that we ever would, on any other profession, because as you said, that would alienate people. We want people to come to this. We want people to be involved and listen to this and share with this. So, yeah, that's definitely what I don't want it to be.
Great. And then another thing is we'd quite like it to be collaborative. So, you don't want to just hear us picking our own topics and doing that kind of thing. Sorry, I put this on silent, Tom. Here's our first
Busy
issue.
man.
No, I did. I put it on silent and it's still beeping at me. So let me turn that off. So yeah, it's collaborative. I think we'll go out on our social medias. We'll put out polls. We'll see what people are interested in. So please do leave comments and follow and message us with things you want us to talk about and anything you'd be interested in hearing our takes on. I'm more than happy to bring everything into. Good. Well, look, 9 minutes 47 seconds. I think in that's a perfect 10-minute window for the introductions. So that's my time check for anybody. I just didn't check your consent to record, Tom. Are you happy to record our session today?
Good to record.
Little in joke there for anyone who's trained in CBT. So, shall we start with our check-in? So, Tom, how
Yeah.
are you?
Yeah. As I was explaining to Tom earlier, I woke up today with nerves, like half an hour before my alarm clock, which is not like me. And I just noticed my mind was instantly alive and awake. Not in a way which meant I didn't feel very groggy, because I did, but in a way that I knew I had something big on today. And it was the podcast, because speaking, putting your face out there is always unnerving. Speaking for a sort of an hour or so and trying to sound semi-professional and let you know what you're talking about is slightly unnerving. So I've definitely had this undercurrent of anxiety today. But what kind of CBT therapists would we be if we didn't put ourselves in slightly challenging situations? So I'm equally pleased to be here and happy to be here. Me and Tom have been talking about doing this for ages now, like, God, over 6 months, I'd say. And we've started, so there we go. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
Yes. How about yourself? How are
I
you
think
doing?
we've both been conveniently busy, haven't we? Conveniently avoidant of starting this one. But certainly something that people have been pushing me to do and I've wanted to do for so long. And yeah, equally the same as you, Tom. Very, very nervous when I woke up. But I've been up for quite a while now. We're recording this at it's now 11:43. I got up at around 6 o'clock. And so I've been up and out with the dog. So I took them on a bit of a longer dog walk, so we hopefully wouldn't get any barking whilst we're recording. Instead, they're snoring. So sorry if you can hear that coming through. Already kind of been to the supermarket and got my day rolling. So I'm feeling pretty alert, but also a little bit, by the end of it, I'm sure I'll be ready for bed as well. But yeah, generally really busy and certainly trying to carve out some more time for myself and soothing. So I'm kind of having to break some of my own rules and take my foot off the gas a little bit. And in a way, this is one of those things, finding space and time to do this kind of thing is me giving myself permission to do that. So it's quite nice to be here with you.
Yeah, great. No, I get that. So, shall we think about then one of our main topics, the defining of CBT?
Gosh, yeah. So I don't want to put you on the spot, Tom.
No, I've got notes, so
Wow.
I'm very well prepared.
You did say actually, yeah. So I suppose the best way is thinking about how would you, if somebody was coming to you as a layman, as a client, perhaps for the first time, who'd been recommended CBT by their GP, but they didn't really know what CBT was. What would you say to them, or how would you describe its how it works and what it is?
Well, I have a very simple sort of story that I tell to people, and it usually is hopefully quite relatable. This is the story. So I say to them, imagine I've got it wrong already. Imagine there's two people walking down the road. One of them is very confident and one of them is very anxious. They're walking down the road at the same time. Now, coming up the road is their best friend, and the best friend who is staring at their phone, fails to see them and fails to acknowledge them and just walks straight on by. Now, the confident person would probably brush that off and say, no worries, I'll just give them a ring at the weekend, no issue at all. And then I'll say, and how do you think the anxious person would perceive that? And they get that because they are the anxious person, and they'll say they did that on purpose, nobody likes me, yada yada. And I'll say, how do you think the anxious person then spent the rest of their day? And maybe they felt rubbish, they avoided stuff, they ate junk food, they didn't go to the gym, and they withdrew. And I'll say, what we do with CBT is try and link that domino effect of thought, feeling, and action. You think certain ways, you feel certain ways, and then you respond in certain ways. And not only that, is how do you think that action feeds back into the original mood and thought pattern at the start? And they'll say, well, they felt worse the next day. I go, yes, they did. So therefore, they're more likely to interpret situations in that same light. So I use that because obviously it's something we've probably all done, probably sometimes even on a daily basis. Now, you can go so much deeper than that. But if I was just doing a very quick summary for a client who wasn't sure, I would keep it really light and simple.
And how do you find people get that? Because I think that's a really nice way of doing it, by giving a really relatable analogy. How do people respond to that usually?
Yeah, they respond pretty well. I tried to make it a bit funny, so I'll kind of specify that the compensatory behaviour that they do is I'll make it about myself, like jokingly. So I ate a tub of Ben and Jerry's and drunk half a bottle of wine, kind of thing. Which again, I think showing up my own flaw is they get it. And because I imagine we've all been there from time to time, so I feel it's received pretty well. Um, then there is
Only,
more spiel, but I won't go on to that just yet.
no, sure. So only half a bottle of wine. How do you stop yourself? Sorry, I'm joking. Um, yeah, great. And I think that's the key, isn't it? Because you could just go so deep. If you look at the literature around what CBT is and all the complicated jargon that comes with it, even the words cognitive. What's
Yeah,
cognitive really? Well, we know it
yeah,
means thoughts, but does
yeah.
everybody else? I mean, that's the interesting point, and I think it's the indication of a really good reflective therapist who can sort of describe this in a way that people can get it, and then not only get it but want to do it as well.
Yep, yep, yep. And I think the selling point, the way selling is sort of a strange word to use, but the way I would sell CBT is I would then talk about the practicality of it and the application of it into your life. And so it is about what you talk about in a room for 50 minutes or whatever. But maybe even more importantly, it's about how you apply it to the day-to-day situations. That's where you get your recovery. That's why it's a short-term therapy, because it's going to be progressive and active for you. And I think that's how you can sell it well to people, as we talk about. It's, again, you can go so much deeper than this, but you could briefly say we're going to learn some tools and techniques and some strategies to better manage the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that perhaps aren't working for you right now. And I think that is such an easy pill to swallow. Um, yeah,
Great, thank you. Thanks for that insight. I'm
yeah,
going to steal some of those ideas as well, I think.
yeah.
And I would do very much the same thing. I suppose I would describe cognitive behavioral therapy as a way of understanding how I sometimes might be keeping some of my problems going by the way I'm
Mhm,
thinking. So thinking about myself and the world and other people,
mhm,
how I'm behaving, and also how I'm interpreting things that I'm feeling. So my physical sensations and that kind of thing. And it's feels a little bit harsh, but almost to say that sometimes I might accidentally fall into traps of keeping things going. So if I'm feeling quite low, I might not do the things I want to do, or if I'm feeling quite anxious, I might avoid things, and then I don't really get the opportunity to learn anything new or to um, break these cycles that are keeping it very much in place. So I suppose understanding how my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors sometimes aren't working out for me and they might be maintaining my problems, and then starting to introduce ways of changing that. So by adapting my interpretations of things, my relationship with thoughts, for example, by thinking about my behaviors and actually how well are they serving me and what impact are they having on my emotions. Sometimes it is easier just to lie on the sofa and watch um, Jeremy Vine, but instead, I, but that's something I've done before. But I might feel quite frustrated with myself, or quite demotivated, or fatigued as a result. So, although it feels easier, actually, how is it serving me? And can I then begin to think about what I need to do to unpick what's keeping these problems going? And that's where these strategies come in. This idea of, okay, this isn't working out, but I don't really know what to do with it. So here's some ideas. Here's some things for us to try and implement and see how we get on.
Yeah. What I like about that as well, Tom, is I think you're kind of promoting more of like again, this is a scary word, and we don't need to think about this just yet, but like that metacognition, so that thinking about thinking, that awareness. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from you. And I think it was Judith Beck that's had a lovely quote that said CBT, or probably more specifically cognitive therapy, is whatever gets you thinking about your thoughts. And that's so important. It's the awareness of the process of the mind. It's stepping back and seeing the thoughts from that almost third person perspective. And I think that's what you've illustrated really well there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I,
yeah.
I don't know about you, Tom, but I spend a lot of my working life trying to help people see that they are beings that can experience really negative and
Yeah.
dark and anxious thoughts and, have really uncomfortable feelings. But ultimately, it's up to you what we do with them. And then we can sort of be a being that observes all of this stuff, like Judith Beck's saying there. And we
Mm.
can then decide what we do with it, whether we challenge it, we accept it, we adapt it, whatever we do. So yeah, I think that's the great thing about this modality is it's empowerment. I think this idea that yes, I feel trapped and I feel very ensnared, but maybe there are things I can start to do. It might not be easy. It might be like trying to push start a car at some point. If you've ever been in that position where you push a car for it to start and that initial is really hard, but once it gets rolling, you can really see the changes we can make. Okay. Now, I don't know if out there in listener land, and when I say listener land, I mean the one person who's kindly agreed, probably from Tom's side of the family, to listen, whether that makes sense. But hopefully it gives some sort of view of our understanding of CBT and, again, breaking down those barriers. It doesn't have to be this complicated behemoth that it could be, or perhaps that some people want you to believe it is. Maybe it can be a really simple mechanism of understanding maintenance. And if we can understand what's maintaining the problems, we can start to then think about what we do with them.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that, Tom?
I do, but I think it would involve me going off on a massive tangent. And I think actually, if it's okay, because we've just hit our 21-minute mark, maybe we should move on to debunking one of the myths, because myth one is just crying out to me at the moment. Shall I introduce the myth one, Tom, and then we can kind of talk it through?
Yeah, so we wanted to kind of segue into this, didn't we, from thinking about what is CBT, just because a lot of people out there will have their own understandings of what cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT is, and maybe they're right, maybe they might be a little bit off the mark. I've done a lot of workshops and things like that with people from different modalities who will come in and say, oh, with CBT, you can't do this, can you? Or in CBT, you don't look at that, do you? And I suppose I wanted to look at these myths just to kind of say, well, actually, what do we do? And to help break down some of that. But Tom, I know you've got some really strong views on these, actually, haven't you? From when we looked at these in the tiny bit of prep we did, that you had quite a reaction. So I'm really looking forward to the full WhatsApp. So I'm really looking forward to your take on these. So I'll bring in the myth, and then we'll see what your initial thoughts are.
Yeah.
Please don't hold back, Tom. The people want to hear it, okay? So the first myth we have, myth one, CBT only teaches positive thinking. So this is the misconception that CBT only really encourages people to think about the positive, so the real sunshine and rainbows. So it won't be bad, it'll be great. Everything will be fine. And that sometimes gets people's backs up a little bit, because people are saying, well, actually, sometimes it isn't like that. Sometimes there are things going on in the world that are cruel or horrible. So just telling me to think positively isn't going to work. So that can often put people off coming to CBT. But Tom, what are your views on it?
Yeah, so it's a hard one, because to try and almost like, I wouldn't say vilify positive thinking sounds kind of ridiculous, because how nice it would be to have a mind of positive thoughts and to see the world in a positive light. So it isn't to vilify that. I think it's vilifying, though, the dependency and sort of the exclusivity of only cherishing positive thoughts, when that really just doesn't map onto the world very effectively. It's a bit of a dark joke, but when I first started up my Instagram page, I was encouraged to write these like false tweets to look, the thing. And it was a positive psychology tweet, and it was something like, the client says to the therapist, all my family passed away in a house fire, and the positive therapist says, oh good, fewer Christmas presents to buy. And the point of that is, what madness it would be to have positive thoughts in response to something so difficult of that. So nothing wrong with positive thinking, but I think there's a time and a place for it. And one word I often bring clients back to in therapy is usefulness or utility. So you might have positive thinking, and that's okay, providing there is use or utility to it. So if you've got a positive thought about X and it prompts you to do Y, and that's really advantageous for you and the people around you, or as we might say later on, in line with your values, we'll demystify that later on. I think positive thinking is great. If you've got a problem and you don't know what to do and you're stuck, but you decide to employ some positive thinking, you get the pen and paper out, and I think that's all power to you. That's really good. But there's a lot of there's a lot of your life when it isn't a positive situation you're going to be up against, and then you might think that you're bad or defective for not having positive thoughts about it, and that's when it becomes really problematic. So, what if you're supposed to feel grief? What if you're supposed to feel sadness or fear? There's nothing wrong with those. There's nothing bad about any human emotion. It's if we judge ourselves for not thinking positively, though, then we've created something of a negative feedback loop in ourselves, and there's a far better way of dealing with those struggles. So, time and the place, I think, is my overarching conclusion for positive thinking. Sorry, to come back to the myth, which is CBT teaches only positive thinking. I mean, it's just not true. There's no there's no validity in that. There's something else I want to add, though. But Tom, is there any? I'm talking a lot here. Is there anything else you
No,
want?
that's fine. I just want to add to this a little bit in that,
Mm,
the world can be awful. Terrible things can happen to people. And not only that, those things don't have to happen for people to be stuck in their own internal worlds, entertaining really dark, anxious or depressive thoughts as well. So I think, yes, we're not encouraging for us to be overly positive and sunshine and rainbows and any of that stuff. But I think what we are thinking about is actually how balanced are these thoughts at times. So yeah, I might be struggling with panic attacks, or things might be happening to me, and I might be engaging with all sorts of thoughts that I can't cope. Well, I'd be really curious about how true some of that is. Yeah, sometimes what we can do is build up negative thoughts in our mind, and although I don't want them to become positive, I would like to be a little bit curious about them and say, look, sure, that could be the worst case scenario, but is there any other way of seeing this? Is there any other way that we could explain this scenario? Or, if we asked a friend, what would they say? Or if a friend said this to you, what would you say to them? I'm just curious about that, because often the advice we give to other people isn't the same as we offer ourselves. We're always much more compassionate to those people. So I suppose that's a nice way of framing it. I like people to tap into their compassionate thoughts. So even if there is a lot of rubbish going on for somebody, actually, where can I be compassionate to myself and not overly critical? Because human beings are the first to stick the knife into themselves. And I think, it's important for us to think about that compassion. A second part of this for me is thinking that actually there's no such thing as negative or positive thoughts. Maybe thoughts are just thoughts. And then this is going to get me on my third wave wagon here, so I won't go too much into this. Something we can maybe save for another topic, but this idea, or another episode. But this idea that these are all just thoughts. We don't have to think positively. We don't have to think negatively. They're just thoughts I simply have. And me being the driver of this vehicle and this being, I can choose which ones I listen to and which I choose to let go of. And that's also a very empowering take as well. And some clients prefer that. So not all clients want to go in and look at all of the evidence for and against their negative thoughts. Some people just want to say, hey, that's a thought. I don't really want to engage with it. And that's okay. I don't have to. It doesn't have to influence what I do. Anyway, yeah, so those are my views, but I completely agree with you. CBT is not all about positive thinking. Instead, it's about being balanced and compassionate.
absolutely, yeah. I love what you said about bringing it back to the compassionate thought. I think that's very, very valid indeed. The other thing I wanted to say is, again, I'm sort of echoing you really, but cognitive flexibility is a far better strategy for life. So if it's positive, let it be positive. But if it's it's about being able to flit between things, I suppose, or to be able to see both sides of the coin. That's the way to contend with the issues that people are going to face, I believe. Is not thinking positively through inherently distressing challenges necessarily, because if you can't think positively during inherently distressing challenges, you might face self-criticism as a result. I should be feeling differently than this. I should be okay with that, and so forth. And that causes, again, another feedback loop a bit deeper down.
Great, thank you. Is it so?
Yeah.
For myth one, CBT only teaches positive thinking. What's our takeaway message from that one? What do we want people to hold in mind if they ever have that interpretation?
Well, I think the language is really important here. So positive thinking is one thing. You've used the word compassionate thinking. I've used the word useful thinking. I think positive is too extreme, it's an absolute, let's say, and we need to have a flexible kind of model that fits with what that person's going to go through. Um, so so I wouldn't say we teach it. We certainly don't not wish it for people, but we wouldn't advise it as the only way to get through life.
That's a really lovely summary, actually. Great. Thank you very much.
Mm.
Okay, moving on to myth number 2.
Yeah, and we are on the 30-minute mark, FYI.
Thank you for the time check. That's very good timekeeping and very CBT. So, myth 2. CBT does not acknowledge the importance of the patient and therapist rapport. So, thinking about the therapeutic care relationship here. So, this is the kind of view that CBT is more reliant on its strategies and structures and theories and formulations and interventions than it is based around the human relationship. The idea that this human relationship doesn't matter as much in CBT as it might do in other modalities. So, Tom, I can see the heckles standing up for you already. As I say that to you, what are the initial things that pop into your mind?
Okay. Well, the initial thing for me is, again, is move into the territory of self-reflection on this, but as a therapist, I know for a fact my strongest asset is, I think, personability. You can make your own minds up, but I feel it's the thing that I'm best at is making that person feel comfortable. And a lot of the feedback I get is always things like it felt like I was talking to a friend, and I value that so much, because I don't believe we'd be, or maybe just me, I don't believe I'd be half as good a CBT therapist if I couldn't m communicate and meet people in a personable manner. Um, and if I wouldn't take much enjoyment from this job if I didn't feel that there was chemistry and connection and energy in that room when going through the models of CBT. So as a CBT therapist, of course, we have to do CBT protocols with them. That's a given. But my experience is you can get so much more from that if only you would sort of inject some elements of fun. There's even banter in difficult conversations. There's likability. There's it's just all those things that you do generally have with your friends as well. So CBT not acknowledging the importance of patient and therapist rapport, that doesn't make sense in the context of how I think my sessions are with people. It's just not the case. Um, Maybe in terms of the teaching, I mean, this would be better for you, Tom, as a lecturer. How do you go about teaching it? Like, how do you explain rapport to the trainees, or do you focus more on the models? Like, how do you guys go about it?
Yeah, no. So, just to give some people some context, I worked as a lecturer at the University of Reading for about 18 months, and solely on a course where we're training people to become CBT therapists. So, yeah, it was an intense course, but very, very rewarding. And yeah, we had whole days, Tom, on supporting people to develop their therapeutic relationships with people. I mean, a lot of these people were already therapists who were trained to a certain level anyway. They were from a different background, whether it was nursing or social work or low intensity CBT. So they were already, pretty aware of the importance of this, and they'd been employed into these roles. So somebody had interviewed them and had seen their humanity. But absolutely, we spend a long time, supporting people to understand the importance of the therapeutic relationship. And there are whole days on it, basically, as a part of the training. And it's also measured as a part of their assessment, really, to become therapists. We go through something called the CTSR, of which interpersonal effectiveness is one of the 12 items. So yeah, it's absolutely a hugely important part. I do notice that some of our students do fall into the trap of focusing too much on the process sometimes, especially when the processes are quite new. If it's a new intervention that they haven't tried before, or a new presentation that they haven't supported before, then yeah, people might fall into the trap of, I need to get this right, I need to be a good therapist for them. And as a result, they then overlook some of the important human aspects. Like, somebody could be sharing a really challenging story, and this person's thinking, gosh, what's next? What do I do next? Because that's what I want to say to everybody. When you're looking at your therapist, if you have one, they might look serene, like Tom does right now. Look, he's so serene. But in his head, it'll be a little bit
Heart
of
rate.
flags in the water. right? So people sometimes fall in. So, when you're watching a recording, it's really clear because someone's telling you that something awful's happened to them, and then this therapist might accidentally say, okay, right, well, let's move on to this then. So this is a thought diary, right? At which point then you can see kind of the people pulling back a little bit and the clients pulling back a little bit. So again, I completely want to debunk this idea that CBT doesn't acknowledge the patient-therapist rapport. There might be some purists out there who do believe this. And there have been some findings, I can think of Leahy off the top of my head, who found that, in an RCT, that perhaps the therapeutic relationship isn't as important as some of the interventions and strategies. But I think that can often be overgeneralized. I often work with people who come to me and they're struggling with OCD. I didn't mention that before, but one of my specialist interest areas is working with OCD. And intrusive thoughts that people can have can be awful about, being a murderer or hurting people or being a sex offender or, doing something abhorrent that they really don't want to do. And the idea of sharing that with somebody, the fear that they could be judged is so scary. So if I'm not, creating a really strong therapeutic relationship with that person, and something that you might agree, Tom, we have to do quite quickly as therapists, as well as form that bond, then they're not going to want to share this with me. And they might not want to see me and they might not want to engage. So I think this myth comes from the overgeneralization of a medical model to CBT, the idea that you don't have to like your doctor to take your medicine. And yeah, I get it. And I know that CBT can often be seen as this prescription model sometimes of, oh, you've got social anxiety, here's your social anxiety treatment. But there is so much more to that. And I really pride myself in my previous role, as a lecturer and also as a supervisor, to kind of cultivate that CBT can be so much more than just this. Think of your humanity, think of your personality, bring yourself in, and build those relationships, because it's only going to increase patient willingness and engagement, and they're going to look forward to your sessions and they're going to want to see you. I mean, I've heard some horror stories, Tom. I don't know about you, about other people's experiences. I had a colleague who was going through a tough time who went for some therapy, and whenever they didn't complete their inter-session task or homework, they got a real scolding or shouting at, or sometimes the session didn't then go ahead. Yeah, imagine that.
Traumatizing, I imagine, for the client.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, when we were, so before Tom and I were CBT therapists, we were PWPs, which is like a low intensity version, basically. I don't know about you, Tom, but when I was doing my training, we had these, like, basically, it's called a crib sheet, I think, a script that you had to follow for a general session. And you had to display empathy 3 times. And we used to put these little stickers on in our script called empathy dots. And it's like, no matter where we were in the script, we're like, God, that sounds really, really hard for you. And then, like, look at the supervisor to make sure they made a note of it. And it's just the least authentic thing I can imagine now. And I find when you kind of feel quite confident with what you're doing, empathy just is natural. And also probably the type of person who wants to be a therapist, I think, would be high in compassion and empathy. And you don't have to say or do anything. It can just be in the tiniest of facial expressions, but your client completely knows that you're there with them. And that is just inherent in any form of therapy, as far as I can tell, except for the horror stories you've just mentioned there. But yeah, it comes naturally, I think, as you become more fluent in your profession.
I think it's also two-way, Tom. I've had some scenarios, where maybe, but just when I was going back to work after my son was born, or if I've been unwell for a little while, and my clients can see that and they'll say, gosh, how are you? And I think, oh, that's so nice that you feel you can ask me that and that we can have that conversation. So look, this is a two-way thing. It's not just, one direction. Okay, what's the takeaway message, Tom, about this myth? What do you want people to take away? What's the headline?
Getting on my high horse. Of all the criticisms of CBT, that one actually gets to me the most, because, as I said, it's something that I pride myself on. I think that's my biggest strength as a therapist is rapport building. And I wouldn't do this job if you couldn't have it, because I wouldn't be getting anything from it myself. I do this job because I love doing it. And one of the things I love to do is build those meaningful connections with people quickly, because I think that's what the best channel to apply CBT protocol from. So yes, that's my take.
Brilliant. And I think if we didn't need that, we'd just get AI to do it, right?
Well, give it a few years. Who knows?
Yeah, I can do some empathy dots. Okay. So our final myth then, Tom, and my
Yep.
favorite, my absolute favorite,
Cool.
CBT ignores the past. So this is the common idea, and quite a reductionist idea, that CBT only focuses on the here and now. And some clients will come to therapy with the view that I can't talk about this with you because you're a CBT therapist and that's not what you do. So, Tom, what are your thoughts on this wonderful myth?
Yeah. Okay. Again, a lot to unpack. I suppose I can see why people would have that belief, for various reasons. I think, without getting into all of that, but there's a big old field of CBT which focuses more on the here and the now, more of the low intensity stuff, let's say. And it's not to say that I wouldn't say it ignores the past, but it doesn't make it particularly relevant in sort of some interventions like behavioural activation. However, CBT with a CBT therapist, when you've got the time and the space, basically always requires a formulation to some degree, and a lot of the times that's longitudinal. And what that means, for anyone that doesn't know, is the way I describe it to my clients is it's like a fancy flow chart, and it's going to help us to understand where your symptoms come into play and where they stem from as well. And to sound a bit like a cliche here, but a lot of people's mental health needs and traumas developed in their formative years. So to ignore their formative years would be to miss so much valuable information about why they think, feel, and act the way that they do today. What do you think, though, Tom? I know this was a big one for you.
I couldn't say any more than you've said. I think I was just thinking, hey, voilà. I think that's fantastic. We spend so much time thinking about how people got to where they are today, what is playing a part in maintaining their struggles today, and the belief that those things that are playing a part in maintaining those problems only occurred within the last period of time is so reductionist. It's just impossible. We've all can relate to really key critical incidents in our childhoods where we've developed these beliefs about ourselves and the world, and how the world works and who we need to be, and what our strengths are and what our weaknesses are, because we're so vulnerable at that stage. And we then develop these rules for living. As long as I live in line with these rules, then we'll be okay. And often the result of what we see in day-to-day life when people are struggling is when those rules are being broken in some way, shape, or form, and people are feeling really quite exposed and down and or anxious. So I think this whole idea that we only focus on the here and now is ridiculous. And if you think about the things we will do, we'll look at these longitudinal formulations, like Tom says. We will look at timelines. We go through people's lives with them. And we do that in lovely creative ways as well. So I feel like I'm justifying myself here. So I'm going to stop justifying myself. But I really want to kind of say that if you ever go for any CBT therapy, you can talk about the past as much as you want. Sure, we might sometimes try and make sense of it in how it's coming out in the present. Absolutely. And doesn't it make sense that we're now doing this because of all these things that happened? But it's not a taboo subject. And I've had clients who've come to me and said, "Oh, you won't want to hear about this, will you? Because it's in my past." And I'd like to think that they leave pleasantly surprised that we can hear this, we can take this information in, and we can use it to make sense of our presentations today as well.
I have a joke that I do at this point, and it actually shows my age, because I always say it's not like we've got a DeLorean and we can go back in time and change it. But I'm noticing all my Gen Z clients don't get the Back to Future reference, which makes me feel so old. So I need to update that. But that's it. It's not. We know we can't do anything about the traumas that you've been through, but it doesn't mean we don't want to hear it. It doesn't mean we can't use that to inform what we're going to do today in the here and now, though. Speaking personally, it's every sort of anxiety I have or avoidant pattern I have. If I really put my mind to it, I can kind of work out why, and it's because of my past to some degree. that's useful. I can't change that, but it's really helpful to know that. It's like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense why I would think like that in that situation. And I think that's, to ignore that would be just like silly. You can get so much more, information for that for the client.
I'm completely with you, Tom. So the headline, I'll take this
Yes.
headline. I'll take it.
Yeah.
So the headline for this one is, although CBT cannot change the past, we absolutely consider the role of the past in developing who we are today and how it might be playing a part in maintaining some of the challenges we have. And if we can start to understand that, maybe we can almost expect it and think about how we can begin to challenge it and change it. So CBT does look at the past, and we enjoy doing it. Okay. Well, those are our myths, and look, only 3. And I think at the 45-minute mark, I think we're doing pretty well for time management. Yeah.
So let's touch base. How are you feeling now? We've got 5 minutes left. We've broken the back of the thing. How are
Mhm.
you feeling at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm enjoying myself. I'm having a good time. I must admit, I do have intrusive thoughts about my computer crashing and losing this recording. So I'm going to be honest. I'm dealing with some internal distraction whilst we are talking here. But I just want to highlight that, that all these things come up for us as distractions that try and take our attention. But no, it's gone as well as I would have liked it to have gone, Tom. I'm really pleased with it, and I am happy so far. How about you?
Yeah. Oh, hearing everything you said, although haven't had any internal distractions, which has been quite nice actually. But I have found my anxiety has persisted. So I thought about 25 minutes, I was like, no, it's sort of again we'll talk about this, but I'm habituating. We'll demystify that later on. But it has remained fairly up, but that's okay. It's been enjoyable. I think we've got our points across. I feel like we could talk for a lot longer on it, so that's cool. We've not run out of material or anything, and I think it's been a pretty bloody good first go.
Which I think is why I'm so worried about losing it, because I think it's important. I'm thinking, gosh, it'd be such a shame to lose some of the key things we've talked about today. All right. So, as with any CBT session, as we come to an end, we consider homework setting. So, Tom, has there anything that's come up for you? And it doesn't have to be directly related to this subject, but it can be. But is there anything that you want to take away and look into a bit more, or anything you want to do differently over the week that maybe we can tap into and think about next time?
A few things that come up for me. First one is going back to our definition of CBT or defining CBT, and that is I'm quite interested in what the parameters are and how it overlaps with its brothers and sisters. And I'm quite curious to sort of put my mind on that a little bit, like NLP. When does that come in? EMDR. When does that come in? And why does it stop where it stops? So that's quite an interesting thought to follow. But I think more relevant for our future podcasts, as I always get the feeling you and I share a bit of a love for third wave. So I think, delineating that a bit as well, second wave from third wave, like that, I think you and I will both feel very passionate about that when the time comes. So I will continue my study on that particularly because I just love reading about ACT essentially.
Fantastic. And I think I will join you on that one as well. I mean, I'm always reading ACT books. If you look over here you can't see the disarray over here, but if you could see that there's a few ACT books like floating around that have had a few pages read, but they're begging for a little bit more to be devoured. So I think certainly looking into that and those topics. I think we can put those topics as future episodes and talk about some of those concepts, like what would the core CBT do with therapists do with thoughts, and what would a third wave CBT therapist do with thoughts, and the idea of the difference between diffusion versus challenging, and the appropriateness of each, and that kind of thing. So I think I'm going to do a little bit more around that and understanding, like you say, those boundaries. Like you said, I think my second homework task is to think about how we also get this out there to get people to comment on what topics they would like too, and maybe we could talk a bit more about that and how we get that voice into this to then have an influence on that too.
That's great. You and I can put our heads together, and maybe it's worth another 2 or 3 WhatsApp messages. Who knows?
Yeah, not
Really
too many
apply
though. Okay.
Don't want to overdo it.
Okay. All right. Well, look, Tom, it's been great to see you.
Yeah.
I hope the session has been helpful for you.
Same time next. I'll send an invoice across in a minute.
Yeah, if
Tom,
you just
for you.
send the invoice over, then I'll avoid that too. And and I don't look. Are we going to have a schedule for this? Do you want to do every couple of weeks or something? We'll try
Yeah,
and do it.
I think
Yeah.
so. I think that'd be great.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, look. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And take care. And see you soon.